Everyone, and my name is Michelle Smith. I am a registered dietitian, and I am here on behalf of Harvard Pilgrim and Tufts Health Plan. Thank you for attending this program today. Our presentation is Cooking with Melon. So I have selected to demonstrate how to make a melon salsa. I mean, who doesn't like salsa? And this was a new recipe for me. I thought that this would be helpful as a way to use up that excess melon that you may have provided at a previous cookout. Plus, melon is in season. So let's get started. The recipe I will go through. Please take the time to write down the ingredients. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and I will answer your questions or comments at the end of the presentation. So again, thank you for joining me. So let's get started with the melon. What I like to do is just talk a little bit about how to purchase melon. I get a lot of clients who will ask me how to purchase melon. They're not quite sure how to go about that. And I also like to talk about preventing food waste, because the average American is throwing away over $400 a year on food waste. So hopefully through this demonstration, I can show you how to preserve some of your produce as well. So let's get started with just purchasing the melon. When you purchase melon, keep in mind, it doesn't have to be ripe. When you purchase it, it will continue to ripen on your counter. But when you purchase melon, you want it to be heavy. Okay, you don't want any soft spots, and you can smell the core. If you smell a little bit of sweetness, then you know it's ripe and it's ready to cut. The other thing you can test is where this stem was. You can press on that, and if it bounces back, then it's a healthy melon to purchase. Now, again, if you're not sure, if you're not getting that sweet smell from the melon, that's okay. Bring it home, store it on your counter. You can store it with other fruit that is that produces high ethylene gas. So fruits like bananas and apples can actually help expedite the ripening process of your melon. So let's say you needed your melon tomorrow. You could put it in a paper bag with some bananas, and it should ripen within 24 hours. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind when you bring your melon home and before you cut it is to wash all your produce really well, because it could have some dirt on it. So what I usually like to use is a vegetable brush. So all your melon you want to rinse off really well. You can certainly use soap and water because you're not going to eat the rind, and you can brush it with the vegetable brush and then just pat it dry. All right. So now that you know how to purchase your melon and how to store it, the other thing to keep in mind is you can store it in the refrigerator after a couple of days of ripening, and that will prevent it from continuing to ripen. So what we want to do with cutting our melon, because again, a lot of people ask, how should I cut this melon? It's kind of awkward. I'm afraid of cutting my fingers. So you always want to create a flat surface when you cut melon. So what you're going to do after you've washed it, and again, make sure you wash your hands as well, is you'll cut the ends to create this flat surface to work with. The other thing I suggest too, I'm a big advocate of composting your rinds or leftovers of your produce. It can contribute to your trash significantly, but this is something that can actually decompose and create a really healthy soil if you have a garden at home. So highly encourage people to compost as well, or if not, donate it to your local farmers. They'll use it for their livestock. So now that you've cut the ends, you have this flat surface. Okay, and then what you want to do is cut off the rind. So you're going to start at the top and you'll work your way towards the bottom. Like so. And don't be so concerned if you leave some of the rind on. I like to cut it this way. I mean, there are other ways to cut it, but you're going to see there's a lot less waste versus cutting it when people tend to quarter it. So you're just getting the edge of the rind all the way Let's talk a little bit about some health benefits of melon. So I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but watermelon, which is part of our recipe, actually reduces muscle soreness. So if you've just participated in weightlifting, long bike ride or a long run, and you find that you're sore the day after, believe it or not, eating a cup of watermelon will reduce muscle soreness. And that is because it has a non-essential amino acid in it called L-citrulline, and that promotes the storage of protein in the muscles, and it reduces that muscle soreness. Now I'm cutting a cantaloupe here, and cantaloupe is a great, all melons actually are excellent antioxidants because of the phytochemicals in them. So the more colorful the produce, the more antioxidants. And antioxidants actually stabilize our free radicals and reduce the risk of developing cancer. So cantaloupe, watermelon, and honeydew, those are the ingredients for this recipe. They're loaded with vitamin A, which is good for your eyes, vitamin C, again, another great antioxidant, which also enhances your immune system, and B vitamins, which provides us with energy. Lots of fiber as well. All right, so now that we have most of the rind off, what we will do is cut this down the center. And then you'll have the seeds here. And of course, we'll just take a spoon, scrape along the inside, and you can put those seeds right in the compost. I happen to have a bin beside me, so that's where I'm going to put those. And again, I currently live in an apartment, so I don't have access to composting. So I will actually save this and give it to a farmer who raises livestock so that he can feed his chickens or his pigs with this. Okay. So that's how you basically would cut a melon. Now the recipe here calls for a half a cup of cantaloupe, a half a cup of watermelon. So here I have some watermelon already diced. So I cut the melon about a quarter of an inch thin. So I have a half a cup of watermelon, 1/2 a cup of honeydew. So look at all the pretty colors we have here. We have red, we have green, and then we'll have the orange from the cantaloupe, and a half a cup of cantaloupe. So I am basically going to be dicing this. So I'll just cut a little bit here. And I'll slice it down the center, about a quarter of an inch thin. I tend to like my knife that rolls. It has a sweet spot down here and it curves up towards the top. It tends to make it easier for dicing. All right, so now that we have about a quarter of a cup or a quarter of an inch thick, I'm going to just roll the knife over the cantaloupe and cut each slice about a quarter of an inch thick. And again, this calls for about a half a cup of each melon. So we'll put that in here. So look at all the beautiful colors we'll have for this salsa. So again, this salsa is great, not only for putting in Tostito chips, but I also love to add it to my chicken. So let's say I roasted a chicken, could put it on the top of the chicken like a salsa, or it's excellent with fish. For instance, we had haddock last night and we placed it on the top of the warm haddock, or it's good as a dressing for salad. So you could complement your salad with this salsa as well. So we have about a half a cup of each melon. Now I am going to add some vegetables to this as well. This is up to you. I mean, the recipe calls for half a cup of red onion and some cucumber. It's up to you. You could make it as is with just the melon and add the onions and lime and cilantro. But I like to put some vegetables in here as well. And they're cool vegetables. They're summer vegetables. And it's just a good way to use them up if you happen to have extras. So now we'll do a half cup of red onion. And if you don't like red onion, that's perfectly fine. You could use a different onion. You could use scallions. You could use a yellow onion if you prefer something sweet. And I'm going to dice this onion. So it's about a half a cup of diced onion. Now, for those of you who find that cutting onions tends to make you teary-eyed, it tends to be because of the way we're cutting it. When we chop down on the onion, those gases will actually get into our eyes and cause us to tear. If you wanted to prevent that from happening, the tearing, you can cut your onion in half and rinse it under cold water, and that will dissolve some of those gases. The other thing you could do is store it in the refrigerator, but most of the time you want to store your onions on the counter. It's good to store your onions on the counter in a basket that's breathable. You never want to store them with potatoes or sweet potatoes. You want to store onions and garlic in one basket separate from the others. Because again, they produce an ethylene gas, and the gas from each vegetable will help them ripen. So you want to slow down that process. But if you don't like that the onions are making you teary-eyed, then you can place them in the refrigerator. Onions are also a great antioxidant and great anti-inflammatory, but they're also very good for the gut. So these are, if you don't like onions and you don't tolerate onions, you can certainly omit them. There are some people that do not tolerate onions or tomatoes. So like I said, you can always omit them if you want. So we have about a half a cup of red onion here. And then we'll cut the tomatoes. So tomatoes can be very delicate and sensitive to cutting. So typically you want to cut a tomato with a serrated edge knife. Now I've washed this tomato just like all my other produce. I'm going to lay it on the flat surface and just slice it about 1/4 of an inch thick. Okay, and again, we're going to dice this. So I'm going to lay it on the flat side and cut it across. And this calls for about a half a cup of diced tomato. Sometimes it'll call for seeded tomatoes. I tend to leave the seeds in. You're going to notice that when you dice it, a lot of the seeds will end up remaining on the cutting board. So tomatoes are, again, another good source of vitamin C, vitamin A, lutein, which again is very good for your eyes. Lutein is very good for reducing your risk of macular degeneration. Cantaloupe also contains the same chemical. So here we have all whole foods. They're also very high in potassium. So potassium is a great electrolyte that actually has been shown to lower blood pressure. So if you're struggling with hypertension or pre-hypertension, this is a great salsa for you because of the potassium. Okay, so that's plenty of tomato. Very colorful. So we have our reds and our orange and our green, lots of phytochemicals. All right, and I am going to add some cucumber. Sometimes it will recommend cucumber that's peeled. I prefer to keep the peel on my cucumber because the peel is very high in fiber and very high in vitamin K. Vitamin K is good for reducing bruising and clotting. So I'm going to cut my cucumber. These are cucumbers that I've had pre-sliced. We were talking about food waste earlier. Cucumbers produce a lot of water. They're heavy breathers and they tend to spoil quickly. So my favorite way to preserve the produce that tends to spoil quickly, such as besides cucumbers, green beans or berries, is I will cut them up and put them in mason jars and they'll last up to a week. Highly recommend preserving your produce in mason jars if you're finding that you're throwing produce away. A lot of times we're throwing produce away because we have all good intentions of eating it and we never really get to it. So we're over purchasing or we're just not storing it properly. All right, so we have about a half of a cucumber diced. So half a cup of each melon, half a cup of tomato, 1/2 cup of cucumber. We're going to put in a jalapeno. So jalapenos, I usually recommend wearing gloves, especially if you wear contacts like myself, because the oil from the pepper will actually get on your fingers and get into your eyes. Forgot to bring my gloves, but when you cut a jalapeno, you definitely would want to wear gloves in case you forget about the oil on your fingers. And I usually like to use a serrated edged knife. And in the center is the seed. So what you'd want to do is once you cut the end off is you'd just take a spoon and score the center of the pepper to get the seeds out. This one was already pre-cut, so I'm just demonstrating. So that's what it would look like. And we're going to use an entire jalapeno here. So we're just going to slice it really thin, again, about 1/4 of an inch thin. And then we'll just dice it up. And peppers you can store in the refrigerator. Now we're not adding any seasonings to this. We're depending on the onions and the pepper and the lime and cilantro to add seasoning, but you are more than welcome to add a dash of cumin or chili powder. Some people will add. All right, now I'm going to add some fresh cilantro. So with herbs, definitely when you bring them home, wash them off because they can have quite a bit of dirt on them. All right, so you definitely want to rinse them out. And then what you need to do, so we only need about 2 tablespoons of fresh cilantro. So I'm just going to put this aside. This will probably give me about 2 tablespoons. And what you want to do is cut off, after you wash it and you're ready to use it, just cut the stems off as much as possible. If you have any leaves, just pull them off. All right. If you're not ready to use your fresh herbs, after you rinse them, a great way to preserve them is to take a wet paper towel, place them in the wet paper towel. I like to treat them like they're a flower or a plant. And then I'll just place it in my mason jar in the refrigerator and we'll keep them fresh for at least 4 days. Okay. If you find that you're not going to use them right away, what I like to do as well is to chop them up really fine with some olive oil and garlic and maybe a little lemon and make a pesto or a gremolata. So I'll put it in the freezer. And that's delicious too. Now with the cilantro, we basically want to bunch it up because the key here is not to mash this in because you don't want the flavor and the oils of the cilantro to end up in the cutting board. So what you want to do is bunch it up as much as possible. You want to cup your fingers so you don't cut them. And I'm going to use my chopping knife that rolls, and you're just going to roll into the cilantro and just very carefully move your hands back so that you do not cut your fingers. You can leave some of the stems in, it's perfectly fine. They're just as flavorful. There's really no need to pull the stems out. I just like to cut the tips off. I'm going to chop this. And again, you can just keep turning it and chopping it up fine. What you don't want to do is chop it up and down. And like I said, crush it into the cutting board because you'll lose all the intense flavors. So cilantro is an excellent herb. Again, another great anti-inflammatory. Pretty much all your fruits and vegetables are anti-inflammatories, antioxidants. All right, so we need about 2 tablespoons. So we'll do 1 and 2 tablespoons of cilantro. And then we're going to do lime juice. So I washed off my lime. All right, we're going to cut the ends. And the lime can stay fresh in the refrigerator. And this calls for about 1/4 cup. So I'm going to take the lime and put it in my lime or lemon press and just squeeze down. Get about 1/4 cup. And this will probably, let's say, about an entire lime you could use. And I would suggest if you don't like a lot of lime, then just use half a lime, mix it up and see if it needs more. So again, less is best to start with. So we're going to mix this up and put some lime juice in it. Of course, this will taste even better the next day when the flavors have had an opportunity to marry, to absorb into each melon and tomato and onions. All right. And if you want to add a little salt and pepper, that's fine as well. So let me just give it a little taste, see if it needs more lime. I think it does. It tastes delicious, but a little bit more lime in there. And again, I tend to like my food seasoned. So me personally, I'd probably put a little chili powder in here. Maybe just a teaspoon or maybe even a smoky chili powder. So you can modify this however you'd like. And there we go. There's your melon salsa. And like I said, you can put it on a Tostito chip. Here we have some scoops. So colorful, fun to serve at a picnic. Or you could place it on top of chicken that you just finished roasting, or any kind of fresh seafood, especially like a halibut or a haddock or a cod. So there we have our melon salsa. Again, it's a ½ cup of each melon, ½ cup of tomatoes, onions, cucumber, 1 jalapeno. You certainly can add some salt and pepper. I tend not to add salt to my food, especially, and if you are trying to manage your blood pressure, I would suggest the same. And about 1/4 cup of lime juice and 1/4 cup or 2 tablespoons of minced cilantro. And there we have it. So thank you so much for attending. I'm incredibly grateful for presenting to you today, and I hope you enjoyed this recipe. And we're just going to come a little closer here to see if we have any questions. Excuse me for one moment. I'm just going to bring us a little bit closer. Here we go. Oh, yes. So here's some great suggestions. So some people have mentioned putting the salsa on top of pork chops. That's a great point. Okay, well, thank you again for attending, and I hope that you'll give this recipe a try. And I hope that you enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay cool.